Do you have so much ADHD flowing through your veins at all times that the only music suitable for your ears is an incoherent flurry of fast-paced electronic music techniques, nostalgia and auto-tune? Do you spend so much time indoors alone that you're actually afraid of the human voice, meaning all music you listen to contains vocals with as much auto-tune as humanly possible? Do you like rockstar energy, pennies and CBD? Or hyperpop is the perfect genre for you, or isn't, depending on how you answered each of those questions? But what on earth is hyperpop? Is it exactly what it sounds like? Is it just pop that's a little bit more hyper, not to mention a little goofy? Well yeah, it basically is, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Rather than easy to follow laid out genre conventions, hyperpop often goes down many different routes, each as disgusting to listen to as the last. Primarily it consists of a more experimental pop sound, distorting and twisting the regular old boring genre conventions of traditional pop music. Vocals are often layered with so much auto-tune that you can barely understand what they're even saying. These vocals are usually layered over fast-paced, high-pitched synths with strange samples and production techniques that sound more like the beatmaker is just flexing YouTube tutorials as opposed to making music. You may be thinking, Coolio, you've just listed out conventions after saying it doesn't follow conventions. Well, you would be correct, I did say that, but it doesn't really do the vastness of hyperpop justice. One thing that has remained incredibly important not only to the creation but popularity of hyperpop is its take on nostalgia. Hyperpop artists take inspiration from what came before them, like most artists, but in a slightly different way. As opposed to a grunge band using elements of punk, hyperpop artists try and combine everything they've listened to as children. The issue is, they were children during the 2000s, meaning they use elements of nightcore, nu metal, ska, dubstep, literally anything that somebody who looks like this would listen to. This may sound like a disjointed mess, and yes, at times it very much is, but most of the time they're able to meld together these inspirations in a way that isn't exactly tasteful, but is sure as fun as to listen to. This is probably all very confusing and incoherent sounding. I promise I know what I'm talking about somewhat. I think the best way to get to the bottom of hyperpop is to focus on what started the entire thing, experimentation. Let's go back, probably back a little bit further than you'd expect, back to 1988, when the term hyperpop was first used. An English writer would use the term to describe the dream pop band Cocteau Twins. Although the term was used all the way back in 1988, it never really stuck and kind of laid in limbo for a few decades. You may be asking the question, does that mean the Cocteau Twins are hyperpop? No, it doesn't mean that, silly. The term would occasionally be resurrected during the nightcore scene in the early 2000s. This actually makes a little bit of sense, as elements of pitch-shifted vocals commonly used in nightcore would go on to inspire a lot of what hyperpop would become in the next 10 years. So far, hyperpop has just been used as a throwaway term for various different things without any consistent definition. The first consistent and relevant usage of the term hyperpop would come in 2014 to describe the record label PC Music. PC Music is a London-born collective and label born out of the crazy big old head of this man named A.G. Cook. The label is known for its exaggerated and glossy take on pop music, often combining bright textures, pitch-shifted feminine vocals, and a vibe that sounds similar to a sentient, malfunctioning Barbie-themed computer. PC Music wasn't only defined by its musical style. Many of the members perform under aliases that are designed to satirize elements of the media, such as advertising, consumerism, and corporate branding. So if PC Music laid the groundwork for much of what hyperpop would become, the inspiration for the genre as a whole must have come from the mind of these motherfuckers. Turns out a lot of the inspiration came from the rave scenes beforehand, as well as the slick production of hip-hop, specifically the sounds of Yasutaka Nakata, as well as artists such as Jay Dilla and Kate Bush would inspire a lot of PC Music, obviously alongside Crazy Frog and Boy in Series 2 sound effect. Thing is, if you listen to the early works of the PC Music label and compare it to what is considered as modern hyperpop, it doesn't really sound too much alike. A lot of PC Music is more minimalist, while the likes of 100 Gex, Brackens or Eric Doer throw an entire sound effects library at you for about 2 minutes straight. So who's responsible for the other offshoot of hyperpop that more so resembles the modern sound? Maybe also kind of 100 Gex, we'll get to that, but now, this dude would combine ambient techno-inspired melodies with heavy 808s and more trap and hip-hop inspired drums, creating something similar in theme to the PC Music style, although more targeted towards the hip-hop and trap audience, which obviously at the time was way more popular and trendy than the sort of weirdo EDM PC Music was attracting. Although, Blade had one trait, a trait that completely changed the landscape of what hyperpop would become. That trait would be his complete inability to sing on key, resulting in vocals drowned in so many effects that it sounds like some sort of robotic angel, only it's very much Swedish. Although cloud rap as a whole is seen as a precursor and inspiration for hyperpop, I believe Blade and Drain Gang spread the style in a way that made the imminent threat of hyperpop more normal for audiences. Like, we already have a Swedish e-boy wailing on autotune. What could be next? Surely not two wizards singing an autotune. Speaking of two wizards singing an autotune, the real catalyst for the mainstream explosion of hyperpop was these two said wizards, 100 800 gecs. Gecs would form in 2015, although it wouldn't be until 2019 that they would start gaining real traction. The release of 1000 gecs in 2019 really pushed the more extreme sounds of hyperpop to a huge audience. Skinny critic behind a computer screen, barrel-headed ass critic with glasses, you name it. Everyone was reviewing this incredibly strange project. But why? What made this particular project flavour of the week for these dudes? Well, it took elements of a lot of what was popular and pushed it to its absolute limits, sounding unlike anything else released at the time. Gecs are particularly skillful at melding various genres that sound extremely nostalgic to many people, like literally they feature elements of nu metal, thrash and ska, all on just one project. 1000 gecs inspired an entire generation of new artists to begin making and releasing music. Anything was possible, all you needed was Fruity Loops, a cheap microphone and a terrible haircut to begin making hyperpop. This pretty immediately saw a rise of underground artists combining many of their influences together, creating a side of hyperpop that followed more traditional song structures and melodies, essentially just becoming auto-tuned hip-hop, but with more experimentation and pop elements. Artists like Glaive, Alden and Eric Doer all began making this kind of music, and slowly but surely inserted themselves into the mainstream. I actually went to Glaive's first UK show, and I'm pretty sure I was the only one over the age of 20 in the building, and that includes the person performing. Hyperpop was slowly morphing into a much more emotional genre, replacing the satirical lyricism with something more akin to the sad SoundCloud rappers of the late 2010s. There, of course, were plenty of production wizards who essentially went from nerds obsessing over software and equipment to literal pop stars. I'm sure nothing can go wrong. Brackens fits into this space, creating some of the most forward-thinking music in the genre production-wise, and even sprinkling a little bit of Midwest emo, which is always nice, just don't listen to the lyrics. So there seems to be a bit of a gap here, something's missing. How did it go from 100 gecs receiving some attention from sweaty nerds to tech-savvy kids being thrust into the limelight? Well, unfortunately, it's all thanks to big tech corporations, who would have thought. Shortly after the success of 1000 gecs, Spotify would create the Hyperpop playlist. This featured music from the likes of Gex, A.G. Cook, as well as Charlie XCX, who was slowly taking a more generic pop music into hyperpop territory in the years prior. This playlist would begin receiving a decent amount of attention, however, it mainly came from individuals who were already fans of the artists within the genre. Of course, Spotify needed help from another big tech corporation. How else is any content ever going to be consumed? Consume content.
Consume media.
Consume.
Moving on. Thanks to the playlist, songs from the genre would begin spreading on TikTok, which melds perfectly with this ADHD algorithm. And once again, history had repeated itself. The movement was assigned a name without the permission or involvement of anyone involved in the creation of the music. Just this dude in this suit, who had a dad in a similar suit that got him the job, that also had another dad in a similar suit that probably got him that job. This has obviously led to artists such as Caroline Polachek and Laura Les of Gex expressing their cynicism towards the label, with Polachek saying the term was invented by Spotify, which is completely untrue, but I understand where she's coming from. And although genres are useful to the consumer in order to classify things they like, I think it's best artists don't consider genre when creating this kind of music. Like many genres, hyperpop is more of a subculture as opposed to anything concrete genre-wise. Some of it fits into the same conventions and could be considered the genre, and some is completely different and goes all wild and there's just nothing alike. Basically, hyperpop is experimentation. It wouldn't even be hyperpop if regular conventions were just followed. You need to experiment. Well, maybe sometimes that's the case, but for f***'s sake, it's too confusing. Just watch the wizards go brr and let this music melt your cerebral cortex until you have no choice but to consume.